Welcome to KRA's The Hub, the official podcast of KRA Corporation. And now get ready to hear workforce topics and trends you need to know on the go.
Hello and welcome back to KRA's The Hub. This is Doug Foresta. I could not be more excited co-hosting today with Jonathan Overall. And our guest today is Andy Hall. He is the principal of Trailhead Strategies. And we're going to be talking about the importance of diversifying revenue for workforce organizations. Jonathan, Andy, great to be with you.
Thanks, great to be with you, Doug. Andy, to start, can you provide our listeners with a little bit of history about your background with the San Diego partnership and what you do now as the CEO of Trailhead Strategies?
Sure, Jonathan. So I started at the San Diego Workforce Partnership in 2014. And I was there till about 2020. When did I leave? December of 2021. And kind of one of my main, I served different executive roles, but one of my kind of main question I asked myself every day that I woke up was, how might we survive if our core funding, WIOA, went away? Would our organization still be relevant? And so a lot of the different projects, initiatives, partnerships that I developed during my time there as the Chief Impact Officer and for a time the Chief Operating Officer were really around that kind of organizational health, organizational financial strategy about diversifying revenue. And so that we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And so when I left there in December of 2021 and started this my own little consulting shop called Trailhead Strategies, I really wanted to kind of bring some of those experiences and that knowledge to the service offerings I offer for my clients. And in a kind of nutshell, my company is myself and some partners that I often work with. We help clients on their journey to build a more inclusive, resilient, and competitive American workforce. And we do that in 4 major ways. So the first is research. So we help our clients find new insights, challenge kind of conventional wisdom about how things are done or what things are or are not. And we establish benchmarks to help folks inform where they are in their journey towards building a more inclusive and competitive American workforce. Second, we do a lot of design work. So we do user-centered design, facilitation. We do kind of user input sessions, and we ultimately help our clients translate maybe high-level ideas or priorities into concrete action plans and initiatives. And so, we pull things from the field about what's working, and we localize it to our clients' context and launch job training programs and workforce innovations for them. Third, and I think what we're going to talk about today is finance. I'll be simple. That one's simple. Like we help clients find money to do the work that they can do. And then finally, we help clients execute. And so we provide kind of embedded project management services with our clients. So we're shoulder to shoulder with them. If they're, maybe overhauling their American Job Center system, or maybe they're running an RFP process that they need an extra set of hands for. Or maybe they're going through an organization restructure. We kind of get in there with the teams and work with them every step of the way. So that's what we do at Trailhead Strategies. And I think we'll kind of unpack some of those things here in the next few minutes, but, really happy to kind of share a little bit about what we're all about.
So Andy, trying to find the best way to ask you this question. I might ask it almost as a devil's advocate. So you said, you thought about, well, what would I do if WIOA funds went away? But obviously WIOA funds are still here. So, what would you say to a workforce leader who says, well, why is this important? Why is it so important to diversify funds? I mean, I am still getting WIOA dollars. Why should I focus on diversification?
I think there's a couple ways to answer that. But one is, in an orchestra, there's a lot of different instruments, and they all do different things for different reasons at different times. As a workforce board or a workforce, agency of any type, really, you could decide to get really, really good at the violin, and you could be the best violin player in the orchestra, the first chair, and you could really, really excel at that. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, when I read WIOA and the spirit of the law, it really is calling on workforce agencies to be the conductor, to really be able to use the strengths and assets of a bunch of different instruments or tools, if you will, to solve the workforce challenges in their community. So WIOA might be the violin, and you might really want to have a really good violin player, and that might be the kind of your foundation for how you do your work. But for different times and different sounds, I guess, to take the analogy way too far, you might want to bring in the trombone or the drums or the flute. And, as the workforce board, who kind of aspires to be the leader of a community, you need a lot more instruments in your orchestra to really meet the very different needs in your community. Let me give you an example. So in San Diego, when I started, we were about 95% Title I WIOA funded in 2014. Our budget was a little south of $30 million, just about all WIOA funds. Two things kind of emerged as I reviewed some customer satisfaction data from our job centers. One was that a lot of people were very happy with our services, but those that weren't, the common denominator that they told us in their customer satisfaction feedback to us was they were pissed off because we ran out of training dollars. And so, we were not meeting the needs in our community for folks who wanted to take short-term training programs in high-demand industries that WIOA could traditionally fund. We'd run out of money every single year, around halfway through the year. So that was kind of point one. The violin wasn't meeting all of the needs of our community for those folks. Fast forward a couple years, so we had to look for other sources of revenue. Fast forward a couple years later, and there's actually a lot of money in the system. And during COVID, people weren't coming into our doors as much. And so we actually had WIOA funds that we could spend. So that no longer was a problem. But there were a lot of folks who were, I would say, underemployed, but did not qualify for WIOA that we simply could not serve. And, we couldn't serve them with some of our TANF funds for the uninitiated, the official name of the welfare program. We couldn't serve them. We had some SNAP ENT, employment and training funds, and we have some community development block grant funds. All those had like income caps that we couldn't still serve that person that maybe was making $35,000, $40,000, but still had needed services to kind of get into the next step of their career. And so at that point, we went and pursued philanthropy and started a renewable learning fund through an income share agreements where people, we pay for scholarships and then they pay us back if and when they make above $40,000 on the other side. And so I just use that as an example of like different tools or different instruments in the orchestra can play different roles at different times. And ultimately, it's about understanding your customers, understanding what they need, and understanding how to deliver it, and working out kind of the funding and the compliance underneath it all. It's ultimately about delivering more value for your customers.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that illustration, Andy, and just even demonstrating some of the ways that data can be used to understand the customers, understand the environment. I'm sure out there are some leaders and organizations that are prioritizing a number of different workforce priorities, and they're considering how do they diversify their revenue. Could you walk us through some of the first steps that an organization can take to start prioritizing?
Yeah, I think step one would be expanding kind of your zone of awareness a little bit about how people outside of the workforce realm are currently financing their talent initiatives. And so, employers are using the tax code for employee reimbursement tax credits. The community college system, for example, obviously has state and federal grants and scholarship programs. There's a growing kind of world of private capital flowing to income share agreements or what's more oftenly called pay it forward funds in different communities that are leveraging philanthropy to provide flexible scholarships and that sort of thing. And, there's also a really big movement around social enterprises where training organizations are generating revenue through some business activity and then using the margin to provide scholarships and other upskilling opportunities for those that they serve. And so there's ultimately, and there's a whole nother bevy of other types of financing tools that folks are using to solve this problem of the skills gap and who's going to pay for it across the country. And I think if we, as workforce agencies, kind of stay in our little box of WIOA without kind of expanding our zone of awareness of the billions of dollars that are going into talent development by different stakeholders across the country, we're just never going to be aware of the opportunities. And then once you kind of maybe spend an afternoon and read some resources that I can share, I think that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a very good resource called a white paper on talent finance on their website, and we can share that in the show notes. It really gives a good kind of overview of the current talent finance system and an alternative reality that we could work towards. But once you kind of expand that zone of awareness, I would say you'll start to actually, I think, see specific opportunities in your community with specific people and organizations where you might be able to put some initiatives together to either secure or generate other types of revenue outside of WIOA. And I'll say one more point, Jonathan. This kind of goes back to the previous question, I think, Doug, that you asked around like, why should workforce agencies care? A big kind of value, at least that we did in San Diego, is that we, of some of our work, we generated about, over the 8 years I was there, about $1 million of discretionary revenue. So unrestricted revenue for our organization that we were able to kind of bank because of our fee for service and some of our other fundraising and other revenue generation activities. And that really felt like you kind of get some of the shackles off of what a workforce board could do, because if we pushed the boundaries a little bit and maybe pursued innovations that were outside the lines with WIOA funds, we had this backstop of money that we could plug gaps. For example, maybe one individual in a cohort was no longer eligible for WIOA, but we wanted to provide, a set of stipends or retention services that the rest of the cohort was getting. We could kind of come in and make that happen with some of that unrestricted revenue. And so it really gives workforce boards, I think, some power and freedom to kind of use WIOA perhaps as a foundation, but to build kind of more creative initiatives and service models for more people on top of that.
That's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you next, because yes, you did some amazing work with the San Diego Workforce Partnership while you were there. You helped facilitate a significant change. At one point, the organization was about 90%, over 90% WIOA funded. Am I accurately representing that?
Yeah. Yep.
And then you got that down into like mid 50s, I think it was, by the time you left. Can you talk a little bit about, you've shared a little bit about sort of, what one would do, but can you talk a little bit about how you were able to achieve such a pretty drastic change?
Well, let me kind of walk through maybe 4 major steps of the journey. So like the first step was becoming a trusted partner with our county agencies. In San Diego, we were a separate 501c3 organized under a joint power authority. Some of your listeners, will have that similar structure. Others will be kind of within a city or a county government. We were a separate 501c3. And I think in my first couple of years, we had some TANF funds, and we really, that the county gave us a contract to administer as a part of just a kind of an intergovernmental transfer. And so we did that well. We got a program that was off track, on track, and build trust with the county executive team in San Diego and the Health and Human Services executive team. And that led to us kind of ultimately taking on most of their pieces of health and human service funding that had to do with workforce. So CalFresh, ENT, SNAP, ENT in California is called CalFresh, community development block grant funding, some county general fund that, maybe the board of supervisors had some workforce priorities. And so that kind of tranche of county, and ultimately that also bled into the kind of our relationship with some of the cities. Anything with workforce was kind of coming our way because we demonstrated competence in managing those funds. So that was kind of layer 2 of the pyramid. And that was probably 2013 to 2015. We kind of established about 5 million of annual revenue in those funding streams I just mentioned. Then layer 3 was philanthropy. We began developing meaningful and deep relationships with philanthropy, where we kind of were able to communicate our value proposition to philanthropy is coming alongside public funds to kind of fill gaps where public funds can't fill, as well as making philanthropy dollars have greater impact by making public funds more effective. We kind of were able to develop a unique value proposition with foundations who wanted to fund workforce programs in San Diego, that we were kind of the place to park it, and we would distribute it to our partners across the agency within kind of a common system and vision that we were leading within our community. And then we kind of shifted. So that was kind of, I guess there's a couple of years there, maybe 2015, 2016, we ultimately began raising about $3 million a year of philanthropy. And then after that, we thought, okay, how do we leverage some of this philanthropic investment to generate some recurring revenue streams? And so we did 3 things on that front. So one was we established what we called a renewable learning fund, which was for those folks who maybe weren't eligible for WIOA. We would finance their training or education, and then if and when they made over $40,000, they would pay between 4 and 6% of their income back into our fund, and it would kind of be reinvested. It would be kind of like paying it forward. We also set up now that we had non-federal money, we began a pretty extensive SNAP ENT claiming operation where, for those who are familiar, the federal government reimburses eligible employment and training expenditures for people who are on food stamps, and you get basically 50 cents for every dollar that you spend back as unrestricted revenue. And so we were able to claim several hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing that. And then we also stood up a kind of a research shop that did research on a fee-for-service basis, and we generated margin that way. And so, but ultimately, at the end of that time, right, we have our core WIOA formula funds. We're highly competitive for competitive grants and contracts from the state, the county, the city, and philanthropies. And then we also have recurring revenue from kind of those 3 business models I mentioned, and kind of all working together to make what I feel was like a very diversified and financially healthy organization to advance our mission.
This is really great, Andy. I really appreciate what you've shared with our listeners today. I believe really giving a visualization of how they can identify outlets to diversify their funding and to maintain that. Do you have any last words for our listeners today and how they can learn more about Trailhead Strategies?
Maybe last word is just, think about your role as the conductor and think about the instruments in your community and how you might kind of partner up and make a beautiful song. Trailhead Strategies, you can find my website at trailheadstrat.com.
Thank you so much, Andy. You shared so much great wisdom with us. Thanks for sharing your words of wisdom. Jonathan, always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you for listening to KRA's The Hub. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about KRA Corporation, visit www.kra.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.